My parents did not attend my wedding because I got married before my perfect brother. The day was bright and full of promise. The reception hall shimmered with light, reflecting off of the delicate flowers and sparkling decorations. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the veil that had taken so many hours to perfect. My dress was perfect, the bouquet fresh and vibrant, the room filled with love, and yet a hollow emptiness tugged at my heart. The most important people in my life were not there. My parents. It wasn't that they were too busy or had missed the memo. My parents had actively chosen not to attend my wedding. And why? Because I had done something that broke the carefully curated expectations they had for me my whole life. I got married before my brother. It had always been James first. The perfect son, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. He was the golden child, the one who excelled at everything. School was easy for him. Straight A's, honors, and academic achievements that kept getting him praise from teachers and admiration from relatives. He was the star athlete, the one everyone cheered for on the field, and the one everyone seemed to look up to. And then there was me, the other child, the one who did well but not spectacularly, who succeeded but not in the way James did. I loved my family, I did, but I had learned early on that the world was built around my brother's success. There was always a clear divide in how my accomplishments were perceived. When I graduated high school, my parents were proud, but they were prouder when James won his state championship. When I went to college, my parents praised me, but there was always that unspoken acknowledgement that James would be the one who would reach the highest heights. It wasn't like they intentionally made me feel like I wasn't enough. It was subtle, but it was clear. Everything was always about James. Everything was his first, and I was always second. So when Mark came into my life, I thought I'd finally found someone who didn't care about those things. Mark was different. He wasn't from a prestigious family. He didn't have the perfect resume or the accolades. He wasn't the type of person anyone would consider perfect, but to me, he was. He loved me for who I was. Flaws, imperfections, and all. When I met Mark, everything changed. For once, I felt like I didn't have to measure up. I didn't have to be perfect. He loved me just as I was, and that was enough. We got close quickly, and it wasn't long before I realized that he was the one. We talked about marriage early on, not because we had to, but because we both knew we were ready. Mark wasn't in any hurry to propose, but when he did, it felt like the right time. But I knew what would come next. My family. When Mark and I decided to set a wedding date, I couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach. My parents had always expected James to be the one to get married first. After all, he was the one with the perfect job lined up, the one everyone expected to marry someone suitable. My parents had this whole script in their heads. James would get married first, and everything would be as it was meant to be. I knew the moment I told them that Mark and I were getting married that it wasn't going to go well. And sure enough, when I finally shared the news, my mother's face fell. "You're getting married before James?" she asked, almost as if she couldn't believe what I was saying. "Yes," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Mark and I are ready." My dad said nothing. He sat silently, his gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. His silence spoke volumes. He didn't have to say it for me to know that they didn't approve. They had their expectations, and I had just shattered them. "I think you should wait," my mom suggested, her voice soft but firm. "James isn't even engaged yet. You know how important this is for him." The word stung. The weight of it all was too much. I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't supposed to have to wait for permission to live my life. I loved Mark, and he loved me. I didn't want to wait for James to catch up with my life. It wasn't about trying to outdo him or step on his toes. It was about living my own life, making my own decisions. But to them it felt like a betrayal. "I'm not going to wait," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. "I love Mark. We're getting married now." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged a glance, and then my dad finally spoke. "Then we won't be attending," he said, his voice final. "We cannot support this decision," and that was it. My parents, the people who had always been there for every milestone, every celebration, were not going to attend my wedding. It wasn't because they couldn't come. It wasn't because of some scheduling conflict. It was because I had chosen to marry before James. The hurt hit me like a wave. I couldn't understand how they could choose to be absent from such an important day in my life. I had always done what they expected. I had always tried to live up to their standards. But this time I wasn't following the script. I wasn't waiting for James to make his move. And in doing so, I had broken their picture of the perfect family. I didn't want to admit it, but their absence overshadowed my day. It didn't matter that Mark and I had a beautiful ceremony, or that our friends were there to support us. It didn't matter that Mark and I had finally committed to each other in front of our loved ones. All I could think about was the empty seat where my parents should have been. In the weeks that followed, the emotional toll took its place in my heart. I tried to call them, to explain, to reason with them, but they weren't ready to hear it. They saw my decision as a betrayal, as a sign of disrespect toward James. They thought I had broken the order of things, disrupted the balance they had worked so hard to maintain. I was no longer the daughter who was supposed to follow James. I was the one who had dared to make her own choice, and that hurt them deeply. It wasn't until much later, when James and I finally sat down and talked, that things began to shift. He admitted that he too had felt the weight of our parents' expectations all along. He had always felt like he couldn't measure up to their impossible standards, and though he hadn't known it at the time, my decision to marry before him had freed him from the pressure he had been under. It took a long time for my parents to come around. They didn't attend the wedding, and they weren't there to witness the start of my marriage, but over the years, they began to see how happy Mark made me. They realized that their expectations had been unfair to me, and they slowly started to soften. It wasn't easy, but eventually they reached out. We began to rebuild our relationship, and although it wasn't the same as it once had been, it was healing. Looking back on it all, I don't regret my decision. I didn't wait for James. I didn't wait for my parents' approval. I married Mark when I was ready, and I chose to live my life on my own terms. Yes, it cost me my parents' presence on my wedding day, but it also gave me the strength to finally take control of my life. The family I had always dreamed of was not the one built on the expectations of others, but the one I created with Mark. And that was enough. In the end, it wasn't about who married first or who followed the rules. It was about love. It was about standing up for yourself, even when the world around you expects you to follow a script. And I did that, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.